Good afternoon. Welcome to the Michigan edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. On the right-hand side, you see a control panel. To shrink that, you click on the little orange box at the top with the arrow that shrinks it, and if it's already shrunk, then you click on it again and it pops it back out. You can see from the agenda that we are doing questions towards the end of the webinar. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, feel free to do so. You would get to the questions tab in the control panel, and from there, go to the far right-hand side, where there's a little box with an arrow sticking out of it. If you click on that box, that pops out that whole question section, and you can write your question or comment right in there. Also on the control panel, you see there's a handouts section. If you click that little box with the arrow, it will take you to a link to the full report. It will also take you to the Michigan 2-page summary, which we will talk through later on in the webinar. No need to worry about any barking dogs in the background. Everyone's been muted. And lastly, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar with everybody who is registered. So please feel free to share that with other people who may have missed the webinar but would be interested in the findings. And so with that, let me introduce myself and my co-host. I am Chris Coffin. I direct American Farmland Trust's National Agricultural Land Network. We are an information and peer learning network that was created in 2020 following our Farms Under Threat State of the States report, when we recognized the need to build capacity around the country of folks who are interested in saving land, and that's saving land through the whole entire toolbox, whether that's permanent farmland protection or through better planning and zoning, or through anything in between. So we hope that folks will consider joining the network. It is free, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. With me today is Angie Doucette, who is AFT's Midwest Land Protection Manager. Angie works with partners across the Midwest to build capacity and to develop resources and trainings for practitioners working to safeguard our farmland, our environment, and our farmers. So thank you for joining today, Angie. And before I turn it over to Angie, let me take a minute just to talk about American Farmland Trust for those of you who may not know us. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We are also the only national agricultural land trust, and we do land projects with farmers, ranchers, and landowners. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker, but I like the one that we had before this bumper sticker. It said, "It's not farmland without farmers." We understand agriculture, we understand the importance of farmers and farming, and we have a holistic approach to agriculture. Our national initiatives and our regional programs focus not just on saving the agricultural land base, but on promoting sound farming practices and focused on the profitability of the farmers on the land, both those that are there now and those who aspire to be there in the future. Our programs and our research inform our state and federal policy advocacy work. We work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of state capitals and Congress, with 6 regional offices, of which one is in the Midwest, and our national headquarters is in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to Angie.
Thanks, Chris. I'm really happy to be here with you today, and thank you all for joining us. We'd like to recognize and thank U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is American Farmland Trust's multi-year initiative to document the status of and the threats to America's agricultural land base. NRCS has been invaluable to this entire research project, as has our research partner, the Conservation Science Partners. For this report, we also collaborated with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Back to you, Chris.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now Angie and I are going to turn off our cameras so that everybody can see the slide deck and then the maps at a bigger scale. And let's talk now about the findings. The first two Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat, State of America's Farmland, released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat, State of the States, which we released in 2020, mapped past conversion of agricultural land, looking first from 1992 to 2012, and then from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we're looking forward. We're using that past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. We started with that State of the States ag land conversion data from 2001 to 2016. And as a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different land types, urban and high density development and low density residential development. So let's talk about those two types of development for a minute. And here you see the spectrum of that. On the left is what we consider to be urban and high density development. So the traditional culprit in farmland conversion. It includes residential, industrial, commercial areas typically found in and around cities and towns. It also includes rural industrial sites such as oil and gas infrastructure and solar development. Anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing as built up. Low density residential development, you can see examples of this towards the right-hand side. It's become a more pervasive culprit in conversion. And AFT worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to match and quantify the impacts of this type of development on the agricultural land base. These low-density residential areas range from what you can see, these sort of lower density subdivisions, to what you see close, not the last one in, the second one in from the right, as what we would consider to be farmettes and ranchettes. This kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms and ranches that remain. It's important to note, and you can see from these pictures, that some agriculture can be found on low-density residential development. And some of these smaller farm parcels, especially those near urban centers, can be commercially viable and quite profitable. However, our research has found that once land has been converted to low-density residential land use, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban and high-density development. So, starting with our historical data, we projected into the future with a business-as-usual scenario. We made a straight-line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we documented from 2001 to 2016 to predict the level and location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or decline. Building off that business-as-usual scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, and we'll get to those two in a minute. For each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. Once we had our projection of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios. We did this in two different ways. First, looking at the agricultural land types. So is that conversion largely on cropland or on pasture land or on woodland, as well as on the quality of the agricultural land that might be converted. And for that, we used our productivity, versatility, and resiliency index that we created in 2020. As with any modeling exercise, there are some caveats. Most importantly, as you can see here, we were not able to account for local zoning. Land use regulations are inherently local, and there is no national database to pull from. This means that our maps represent the general pattern and the rough amount of conversion that is likely based on conversion patterns from 2001 to 2016. They do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and potential fallowing of land because of lack of water. Mapping this impact is very complex and was beyond the scope of our analysis. You'll see in the website, though, when we get there, that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections about water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios we modeled. First, business as usual, again, taking that 2001 to 2016 data and making a straight line projection out to 2040. The second is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl, and particularly low-density residential development, actually gets worse. We know this is entirely possible as high prices, home prices in more urban areas are causing more people to move further out of town and to more affordable housing options. We also know that work opportunities, remote work opportunities, are becoming more prevalent and will only become more attractive as rural broadband expands. Some parts of the country may already be on this runaway sprawl trajectory. And then lastly, we modeled the future that we hope for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential, commercial, and industrial development on productive ag land. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some land, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant farm and ranch land to meet the needs of the future. So let's look quickly at the assumptions that went into the three scenarios. As I mentioned, the business as usual is simply using that historic rate of conversion. You can see in this chart that we adjusted the rate of the urban and high density development and that conversion because we adjusted it for future population growth because we know there's a strong correlation between population growth and expansion of urban and high density areas. For runaway sprawl, you see that we kept that same rate of urban and high density conversion, but we increased it substantially from the business as usual scenario for that low density residential development. And we did that because that has been, as I said, the more pervasive and what seems to be driving a lot of sprawl in many places around the country. Conversely, in better built cities, you see here that we took that historic rate of conversion and we assumed that that could be 20% reduced by shrinking that footprint on that urban and high density development. We took a more ambitious 50% drop from that historical rate on the better built cities. We know this is an ambitious goal, but we think that it is achievable. So now let's look at each scenario's potential impact. Here on the left, you see the actual conversion. This is the 2001 from 2016 data. We converted about 11 million acres of agricultural land in this century alone. And I would note that in Michigan, that number was 240,000 acres. Under business as usual or worse runaway sprawl, we could see another 18.4 to 24.4 million acres of farm and ranch land converted or threatened by conversion. Conversely, if we make those smart choices about where and how we site future development, we can reduce that footprint of conversion to 11 million acres. And I know some folks are saying 11 million acres, that's really the best scenario. Our response is that development, including renewable energy development, is necessary, and the need for affordable housing options is acute. And while it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their growth, and we certainly hope that they can be, we chose what we believed to be a realistic scenario. So these next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how Michigan compares to other states. This slide shows projected total acres converted by county. The darker the rust, the more acres converted. And here you see largely what we are projecting for conversion has a significant impact in the southern half of the state, with a little bit going further up, as you can see there on the northwest side in the lower peninsula. This next one shows percent of agricultural land in each county that is projected to be developed. And here you see a slightly different pattern. Again, this pattern is influenced because this is a percent of all the agricultural land in the county that will be converted. And this reflects those places, particularly where there is where there's a significant conversion and a smaller amount of total agricultural land in the county. Another key finding relates to impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of land, or what we called its PVR values. Land over a certain PVR threshold is land AFT considers nationally significant land. Land which is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. While this land is concentrated in certain parts of the country, every state has some nationally significant land. What we find in our future projections is that conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of all agricultural land, likely because, for the reason why it's so productive, it's relatively flat, it's well drained, it's free of rocks. Those make it the most easily developable. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impacts. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion from 2016 to 2040 will occur on this land, even though it represents just 38% of the country's farmland base. Excuse me. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. And to put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, the total acreage of land in the U.S. devoted to fruit and nut and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres. So here's a top 12 list that you don't want to see your state on. This is the acres of nationally significant land that are likely to be converted out to 2040. You see here that Michigan ranks 10th amongst all states of projected conversion of its highest value farmland with 304,000 acres. And while this is a relatively small percent of the 7.8 million acres of nationally significant land in Michigan, the loss of this land affects both future production and profitability, as farmers in impacted counties look to offset the loss of that highly productive land with more marginal farm ground. Reliance on more marginal land can also have environmental impacts as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Angie to talk through the next two slides.
One of the other threats we are highlighting with this report is the threat that solar development poses to agricultural land. To be clear, American Farmland Trust supports renewable energy development. However, we think it's essential that we plan carefully so that our most productive, versatile, and resilient land that we just talked about is not compromised. We also think it's possible for agriculture and solar to coexist in mutually beneficial ways. This map shows the projected acres of utility-scale solar photovoltaics energy generation facilities by state in 2040. This data comes from the decarbonization with electrification scenario of the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Future Study. This study estimates that there will need to be 7.4 million acres of utility-scale solar in place by 2040 to meet federal energy goals. This map shows the percent of undeveloped land projected to be used for solar development based on that same Department of Energy solar future study. You'll note for both studies, Michigan falls in the middle for the amount of solar development expected in the state. If you're interested in more information about the solar modeling we did as part of this project, our solar technical paper is available through our Farmland Information Center. We will also be releasing a solar white paper later this year. The most important takeaway, however, from our modeling is that 83% of the projected solar development by 2040 will be sited on agricultural land, and of that 83%, nearly half of the projected solar will be sited on our nationally significant land. So we're now going to dive into the data available for Michigan on the interactive website. And for this, we're going to be joined by our colleague Beth, who will be our navigator. Back to you, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Angie, and thank you, Beth, for being our navigator. Okay, so you're now in the website, and Beth, when she's done cruising, will put a link to the website in the chat. This is the cover page you come to when you log in or get to the website. You see it says what we did, what we found. It's just sort of summary of what I just talked about. To get out of that, you just click on the little arrow in the upper right-hand side. While we are thinking about the upper right-hand side of the website, let's look at the other tabs that are up there. So when you see the About one, that just takes you back to that covered document. Next to that About one is a how-to, and that how-to takes you to a 5-minute YouTube video that explains how the various data layers can be used with each of the scenarios. Next to that is a view report. That report takes you to a link to the Farmland Information Center. And here you see where Beth has just taken us that it takes you to the full report, to the executive summary, to the solar technical report that Angie just mentioned, and the what else that you can see here, the web mapping tool, and again, the State of the States report, which is our former report, which has a lot more information, and that website has a lot more information about the PVR values of land. So, and finally, you can see here on request data, that takes you to a form where you can ask for data layers. You can ask for the spatial data, you can ask for further information, particularly at the county, if you don't see your county listed in some way or you want all of the county information. And again, what we think about this report is some of the most useful information is that we now have county data that we did not have before, and we hope that will be especially helpful. So with that now, Beth is going to zoom us into Michigan. And when you click, you can click anywhere on the state. And when you do, what comes up on the left-hand side down below is that statewide information. And on the right-hand side happens to be Clinton County, which Beth happened to have her cursor on when she clicked into Michigan. So we're going to talk through a little bit about what you can see right here. So here you see on the left for the state and on the right for the county, the projected conversion of land split out by type and by scenario. So business as usual for the state as a whole, there's a little bit of urban and high density development and a lot of low density residential development for a total of about 483,800 acres of projected conversion under business as usual. I think I remember reading that that was maybe 4.1% of Michigan's ag land base. You see that the number grows under runaway sprawl and shrinks again under better built cities. And in this case, Clinton County here looks like it has the same basic split of urban and high density development, accounting for a little bit of the projected conversion, but most of it being that low density residential land use that we talked about. So if you keep going down, you can see here that we have provided the data by state and by county on the acres of best land. And this is land that is, so we have two different things here. We have nationally significant land, and then we have land that for every state we sort of did on a continuum. What is the top 50% of that land based on its PVR value? And so here you see, based on that best agricultural land, so that upper 50% in terms of quality of land, that looks like it would be a conversion of 227,000 acres, or 47% of the state's conversion as a whole. And that number goes up for runaway sprawl and down for better built cities. And if you look down here where it says 483,800 acres, this, you can see the split in land type, in that cropland is accounting for a majority, quite a bit of conversion, followed by pasture land. And let me give a note about this woodland. This is obviously not all the forested acres that would be converted out to 2040 in Michigan. This is woodland that is associated with a farm, and this was based on modeling that we did in 2020 to give us that capacity to look at what would be the impact of woodlands that are parts of farms. Down below, you see here what I was mentioning about how low density residential development paves the way for more high density urban development. And here in Michigan, it is 9 times more likely that land that was in low density residential land use in 2016 is 9 times more likely to be converted to urban and high density development by 2040. With that, now we're going to take just a minute to look at the downloadable report for Michigan that Beth is pointing on with her cursor here in blue. This is an easily printed, easily downloaded, easily digested bit of information that we hope that all of you will share widely with your membership if you work for an organization, with policymakers, with county officials. We think it's got many uses, with reporters. Again, you can see here it has that 483,800 acres projected to conversion as a whole. What we've done in this report is to look at what that impact of that amount of agricultural land loss is likely to mean in terms of the agricultural sector. So it could be the equivalent of losing over 3,000 farms, 353 million in lost farm output, and 8,100 jobs in the agricultural industry. Those are all numbers that were derived from data that came from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. And then here, the 63% figure is the conversion likely on Michigan's nationally significant land. Again, that's the land that we consider to be the best of the best around the country. And here you see the counties that we project as being the highest, the most impacted: Genesee, Kent, Ottawa, and we will get into that in a little bit. Going down, you see a little more useful information on this second page, again, breaking down the type of conversion, what types of choices that we make could impact what that impact on agriculture would look like. And so we hope this is useful and that, again, people will find it easily digestible and shared. And with that, now Angie and Beth are going together to cruise into the maps to talk a little bit more about some county impacts.
Great, thank you, Chris. And thank you, Beth, for helping us cruise around the state. To get us started, Beth, can you go to the left-hand map in the top left part of the screen to the drop-down menu and show where we can select one of the 3 modeled scenarios? And in this case, we will be selecting runaway sprawl on the left-hand side of the screen. And then on the right-hand map, can you please show how you can select better built cities as our scenario? Before we dive into comparing these different scenarios, I'd like to show some of the functionality of the maps and how you can change the views to best serve your needs. Can you show, Beth, at the top right, can you show the legend? As our base map is currently in the 2016 land cover view, you can see the different colors that represent in the legend that represent the land cover. So green is farmland, and then the red and orange represents the data layer on top of the land cover. As part of our data layer, we have this toggle tool that allows you to adjust the transparency of the data layer so that you can see more easily see the land cover or the other base maps that are available underneath. Finally, I wanted to show you how you can switch between the different base maps. Like I said, right now we are in the 2016 land cover. The satellite base map is also available to you if you click to the satellite. It gives you a bird's eye view of the landscape as we're cruising around. And then finally, the standard, which is kind of a grayscale of the underneath and just shows you the main throughways and the municipalities on the map. So we're now going to spend some time in the web app comparing the scenarios that were modeled. And we're first going to look at Genesee County. The modeling shows, as you would expect, that moving out from the population center of Flint is where we see the greatest low density residential development is expected to occur. This loss is occurring near city centers is often disproportionately impacts smaller farms that often serve local markets with fresh produce, eggs, dairies, and meat. These small and peri-urban farms also tend to incubate new farmers and are instrumental in navigating supply chain disruptions as we've been seeing in the past couple years or so. But moving east to Lapeer County, the story is slightly different. Comparing the two scenarios, we see large blocks of farmland that will be converted to low density residential. And you can see, as Chris and Beth illustrated on the data below, that you could see a pretty substantial difference in the orange, the low density residential data between the runaways for all scenarios and the better built city scenarios. We know that low density residential, as discussed earlier, areas were 9 times more likely to be converted to urban and high density land use compared to other agricultural land in Michigan. So when comparing these two maps and the acreage data below, you could see the substantial difference we can make if we invest in these policies and programs for smart growth and farmland protection that we will talk more about in the later part of the webinar. And then finally in Kent County, we'll travel there around to Grand Rapids area. You see a similar story as you do in Flint, where this low density residential expands outward from the city center. This land use, as was discussed earlier, this low density land use fragments the agricultural land base and can limit the viability of production. So it's important to point out again that these are predictive models, and what we will do and what we do will change the outcome. That's all that I have. Back to you, Chris.
Great. Thank you so much, Angie, and thank you so much, Beth. And so now we are going to go, while we've been talking about findings to date, now we are going to talk about what we all can do. How can each of us help to choose an abundant future? Our report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. So if you were a county or municipal official, a state legislator, a state agency employee, or a congressional staffer, we hope, or a member of Congress, we hope that you might find a recommendation in here that you would like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. If you are a farmer or a landowner, a community advocate, you work for a conservation or a farm or a smart growth organization, We encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. So let me just highlight a few of the things that we discuss in the policy recommendations. Under this first category, encourage smart growth. Foundational to smart growth and compact development is good local planning. Comprehensive or master plans can provide the vision and the roadmap for land use regulations that promote compact development and minimize development of a community's best farmland. We encourage communities to have comprehensive plans and urge folks who care about the future of farmland and farming to get involved in their local or county comprehensive or master plan development and review. We also encourage states to support local comprehensive planning and to have a statewide plan for agricultural land retention and protection. Under protecting agricultural land, Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year. Two important programs in that bill are the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, both of which help to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers and landowners. More funding for those programs would help protect more farmland in Michigan. We were very excited to see significant additional funding for both these programs in the Inflation Reduction Act passed by the Senate over the weekend, and are grateful to Senator Stabenow for her crucial support of climate-focused funding. The House is expected to take up the bill later this week. Under advanced smart solar siting, state and local governments can incentivize solar development on existing infrastructure and marginal land, as well as incentivize agrivoltaics or dual-use solar development. If solar is located on productive ag land, local governments should ensure that solar development adheres to best practices for the construction of the facility, its operation, and its decommissioning, to preserve soil health, to preserve water resources, and importantly, the ability for a farmer to farm the land during and after the life of the project. And lastly, under supporting farmland access, state and local governments can develop their own or help to fund extension or NGO programs that provide farm listing, linking, and matching services and or technical assistance to farmers. This type of programming can range from FarmLink websites to customized assistance to older farmers and landowners looking for a successor or for a long-term farm tenant, and to farm seekers needing help with identifying and assessing land opportunities. Michigan FarmLink is a great example of growing programming in this arena. And now Angie is going to talk a little bit more about planning for agriculture. So with that, Angie, I'm turning it back to you.
Great. As Chris said, there are key strategies that American Farmland Trust recommends as best practices that have been taken from other places across the nation. This community planning involves these four basic principles shown here, principles that can work in tandem with efforts to plan for smarter, more compact development. They include, first, they include inventorying resources in your area, whether that be your productive, versatile, and resilient soils, your riparian corridors, your watersheds, or your viewsheds. And perhaps the most important of these is engaging farmers in planning for the future of agriculture. We need to engage farmers in the public process, asking them what their vision is for the future of agriculture in their community. Community planning is critically important to smart growth. As part of this planning, American Farmland Trust encourages communities to incorporate agriculture into community plans and to have an element for the conservation of agriculture. This could be captured in a comprehensive plan. Finally, the implementation of tools to retain and protect agricultural land, which includes things like urban growth boundaries, agricultural zoning, and farmland protection programs, to name a few. Here in Michigan, we have great examples of communities planning for agriculture, Peninsula Township and the City of Ann Arbor Greenbelt, just to name a couple. Many resources on planning for agriculture can be found on our farmland information website. and we hope you will check them out.
Okay, well, thank you, Angie. So now let me remind folks, because at the moment I don't see any questions, so I hope that folks will again put a question in or two into the chat, or even if you have comments on what you have seen, we're happy to share them with everyone. Again, to get to that questions tab, go to the right-hand side of your control panel. You see a little square with an arrow, and you click on that, and that pulls the questions section out, and you can write a question in there. While we are giving folks a minute to put any questions in there, I wanted to just raise a question with you, Angie, and offer an observation first, and then ask you to talk a little bit about it, because I know you've got programming coming in this area. Michigan is a great example of a state that has helped to build local purchase of agricultural conservation easement, or what we call PACE programs, at the township level, at the county level, and has a wealth of land trusts that do work around agricultural land protection. But I can imagine that there might be some folks on this call or listening to it later who will say, my county or my township doesn't have such a program yet. And so what are some of the first steps, and what are some of the resources that we can look to help to do that?
Sure. Well, it's a great question, and it's a timely question, because we are working as the Midwest Farmland Protection Manager. One of my main charges is to provide resources to to people like yourselves on this call, the people on the ground that care about farmland and want to see it protected. And one of the ways that we're doing that is in September, we are hosting a two-part workshop basically called Developing Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easements Programs at the local level. And the two-part workshop is going to include American Farmland Trust experts, as well as local practitioner experts, including representatives from the state of Michigan, that are going to talk about the realized benefits that they have seen in their community as they've been 10, 15, or even 20 years on in their the advancement of their local conservation program. Talk about the benefits of their program and how they have seen the investment return in the conservation of agriculture return to the community. And the second piece to that workshop is going to include some of those first steps that it takes to develop a PACE program, as you mentioned. And really, one of the things that I'd encourage is to take a temperature of your community and learn what it is that people care about. Is it water quality? Is it buffering habitat or natural spaces? Is it conserving view sheds? What is it that really inspires people to want to protect and preserve agricultural resources? So in the back to the workshops, in the second workshop, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the different components that are involved in getting a program on the books. But then we're going to spend some time talking with folks that have successfully developed that campaign, that local campaign, if you will, by serving local citizens and really getting the momentum and energizing people around the importance of farmland protection.
Great, thank you, Angie. So it is nice that we have gotten a few more questions. Here's one that we could spend an entire day on this one, which is, do you have policy recommendations for also supporting local food systems as a way to protect farmland? And the answer to that is, we absolutely do. We think about this. We are one of, I'm sure, a number of organizations, and I'm sure there are quite a number in Michigan that think about this as well. And if there are folks who would like me to give a shout out to any particular organizations, feel free to write them in. Short answer is not in this report. Long answer is that we have many idea for policy solutions that are around encouraging local food systems. So in the whole arena, and this can be done at the state level, there's obviously federal policy around it and local policy, but it's creating and supporting the markets for those and building and generating demand and facilitating opportunities for farmers to be selling locally, and both in terms of value added and additional marketing opportunities. Along with that is often the needs that are related to business technical assistance, and that is an arena where AFT has been focusing a lot of our time to think about what are the opportunities and where is the need to provide that kind of individualized business assistance that we know is so important, particularly for smaller and mid-scale farm operations, as a way to improve just their financial literacy and record keeping, to get better access to credit, and to be able to think about accessing more land. So there's many things. So both in the market development, the business development, the taxing side of things, tax and labor are issues obviously hugely important to agriculture and to local food systems. So those are just some of them. I could go on and on, but I guess I shouldn't. So because we now have several other questions. So, but for the questioner, please feel free to be in touch if you would like to have a longer conversation on that. I want to hang on, look at a couple more questions. I'm sorry. So here, let me just say that somebody wrote in to say, in response to that last question, the newly updated Michigan Good Food Charter has recently been released. This is the second iteration after the first, established in 2010. And it looks like we can put that URL out when we send a link to the webinar recording. Another question is a huge concern in Michigan is the impact of farms on water quality. Any tools in the mapping on water quality? And the short answer to that is no, not specifically. On the longer term, in sort of thinking about it more broadly and the impact of ag on water quality, any thoughts on that from your end, Angie?
In terms of the impact of agriculture on water quality?
Yeah, I think so. This question was specifically on the mapping, and so we don't have any mapping, but I guess maybe the one point that I would make is, again, I referenced the fact that there was significant new investments in USDA's conservation cost share programs and in the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program in this Inflation Reduction Act. And that, we believe, will have an enormous benefit for farmers and ranchers around the country to be able to more aggressively address water quality issues, along with many other climate concerns, both to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. So this significant increased increased investment in these NRCS programs, we think, will help to address many issues around both climate concerns and water quality. Somebody wanted to note that Legacy Land Conservancy is a partner in the Washtenaw County Highly Collaborative Farmland Protection Collective. I'm glad to know about that, and we will be in touch. And then here's a question. What can state agency staff do to enable conditions for local governments to build better cities? And again, I think this could be a very long topic for conversation. But in terms of state agencies, it obviously depends on the type of agency that one is in. One way for sure is to think about what is the support that local governments need in order to do better land use planning. So I think number one, it's building that capacity for the local counties and communities to be able to do more land use planning and accompanying zoning. The second thing is, what can state agencies do to incentivize compact development? And there are examples around the country. And if you are interested, I would reach out to our Farmland Information Center. But cases where agencies of agriculture have incentivized certain types of local land use. I know this has been the case in Massachusetts. Other examples where you can incentivize having, like actually in Michigan does, of having these local farmland protection plans. But I think it's to think creatively about what are the ways to incentivize that compact development. And that can be done by an economic development agency, by a housing agency, by a natural resource agency, or a Department of Agriculture. With that, let me offer up one. Oh, hang on. I'm looking through. Now you guys have done lots of questions here. All right, now I'm having a hard time getting through all of these. Hang on, bear with me, folks, for 1 minute. There was one question here. How can healthy soils and climate-smart agriculture work in tandem with farmland preservation in a mutually beneficial way? And I think that is an excellent question. I would say that one of the things that we are doing at American Farmland Trust is thinking more about how do we have what we would call stacked conservation. We think of permanent agricultural easements as a tool that is about durability. It is about ensuring that that land remains available for agriculture in perpetuity, or if it can't be perpetuity, whatever that time period is. Thinking about how you incentivize the practices on that land, we think is better, because again, those practices change over time, that those thinking about practices are not ones that should go in a permanent easement, but that those who are thinking about farmland protection can be thinking about how do they help to support farmers and landowners who are looking to add additional conservation practices on their protected farmland. So it's thinking about, can you have management plans or separate conservation contracts that go in tandem with a permanent conservation easement, so you're paying a farmer or a landowner for those additional conservation practices that they might be employing in addition to having an easement on their land. That's a lot of what we are looking to do, and it's actually one of the things that we think is great about the Federal Regional Conservation Partnership Program, because it is a program where you can potentially combine payment to a farmer or a landowner for an underlying easement, and on top of that, to build in some additional payments for conservation practices that might come in separately. With that, I think, Angie, seeing what time it is, we should probably wrap up. So let me finish my section here with a note about the two boxes you see on the screen. As I mentioned, the National Agricultural Land Network is relatively new. We are very interested in expanding and will be expanding our programming regionally as well as nationally. We want to do more, particularly in the planning for agriculture arena. So if this is of interest to you, or if you just want to be connected with peers from around the country who are doing this kind of work, we hope you will join us in the network. Again, it's free, and you see that farmland.org/NELN is the way to sign up for it and to learn more. Our farmland information at American Farmland Trust is a long-standing collaboration we've had with USDA. It is an information center, as you see by the name implies, that is a wealth of resources for both landowners as well as those conservation and farm organizations and state and federal agencies looking for additional data and information. It has a wealth of information about agricultural conservation easements, about making the case for having public programs for these types of easements. It has a lot of resources around planning for agriculture. It has a wealth of information in data sources from the Census of Agriculture to the Natural Resources Inventory that NRCS has. And best of all, for some of us who like telephones, it has a telephone number with somebody who answers at the other end. So please feel free to pick up the phone and call them if you don't like to do your work via the internet. And so with that, Angie, I will turn it back to you to close us out.
Thanks, Chris. And I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of you that joined us here today. I know we're all pulled in many different directions, so I really appreciate the opportunity to spend the hour with you and to go through these impactful results here through our Farms Under Threat initiative. And again, I really encourage all of you to take the information you've learned here and to advocate for farmland protection as we move into these different potential scenarios that we looked at. So thank you again, and thank you for your engaging conversation and your questions, and I look forward to seeing some of you down the road.
Great, thank you all.